Alright, so hello everyone, my name is Tsukiyo. You might remember me the other day. I did a pick ban analysis video of World Elite versus Line Gaming Day 1 of the World Play-In stage, and I figured since I did one that I had contention with, I could do one that I think is actually a top tier or really good pick ban to say the least. So today I'm going to do Play-In Day 3. It's going to be Fnatic versus KLG, Chaos Latin Gamers, I believe. And we're going to break down their pick ban, and I'm going to tell you basically all the reasons why I think it's actually phenomenal. So I'm going to preface the video saying a few things. I had to do research on Chaos Latin Gamers because I'm not familiar with minor region teams. I am pretty familiar with Fnatic though, so I do have a few statistics that will be provided primarily by Gamepedia, because unfortunately I couldn't find any other website that is as updated as Gamepedia is. So just noting that's where I got statistics from. However, other facilitating information is actually something I was able to provide on my own. So that out of the way, let's get into this. So, as you can see, first slide I have open here, we have the pick ban phase is already done, the ban phase is already done, first ban phase, and we have the first pick on the side of Fnatic. Now, before I get into the first pick, I want to go through the bans and why they're so great. So, out of Fnatic we get Sejuani, Kog'Maw, and Jarvan. Now, Jarvan and Sejuani are obviously heavy engage, especially with Jarvan. And there are options later on down the road in pick ban that could facilitate a Jarvan, not to mention Monteraya. I can't roll my R's, so I'm not going to try. But Monteraya was 3-0 in summer with Jarvan. And so this would be a pretty lane dominant pick in most cases. So getting rid of that on top of the hard engage, prevents a lot of options, especially since Plugo, KLG's mid laner, can play things like the Galio and the Orianna. So you could remove this deep engage, which would make things like the Orianna and the Galio, assuming that KLG could get them at any point, less effective, right? So the Kog'Maw is a little weird because Fix doesn't have many recorded games in professional play. Now, obviously, we don't have certain variables such as scrim results and maybe solo queue. He could have been spamming the champion. Admittedly, I didn't look, so those are variables right there. But he doesn't have a lot of recorded games in pro play on the Kog'Maw. It could just be that Fnatic didn't want to deal with handling a Kog'Maw. However, other than that, they took two champions off the table that KLG does have some experience with and knows how to play around that heavy engage. So they removed those options, right? Now, on the side of KLG, they ban Kalista, Nidalee, and Syndra. Now, right away you think Kalista and Syndra are great bans because Kalista is a known legacy pick for Reckless. On the Gamepedia page, it says he's 15-5, which is a 75% win rate. The highest win rate ADC he has with 20-plus games. So, taking that off the table is great. Syndra ban, Caps has 16 recorded games in pro play. I think it's his most played champion right now, with 16 total. He's 13-3, and he has a win rate of 81.3%. So, on top of the fact that Syndra is obviously a lane bully, can have excellent single target pick potential, and potentially AoE stun depending on if you have enough time to set up your balls or if you throw the ultimate first and then sweep, which is something that players do in niche situations, then this is a very powerful pick. Especially since Caps has shown incredible proficiency on it, taking it off the table and then enabling other picks that would normally get bullied, like, say, the Orianna in lane. This opens up many mid lane possibilities later on. Regarding the Nidalee ban, Broxah has hardly played Nidalee in competitive. I think it might have been one game in spring, in fact. So taking this off the table seems weird. Again, it could be the result of potentially scrims, maybe solo queue, but it's not something Fnatic run as a unit very often, so it does seem a little out of place. There is potential here to have banned other champions. I couldn't give an exact suggestion because it would depend on the pick and ban plan that they have coming into the game, KLG I mean. So my thoughts on these are just pretty simple. By banning the Kalista, what ends up happening is that the two ADCs remaining are Xayah and Tristana. So since Xayah and Rakan are open at the end of this, that means there's pressure for the teams to either break up the pair or face the pair. So Tristana, who happens to be Reckless's, I guess, like we could say, semi-second or third, it's a top 80 carry champion for Reckless. He feels immense comfort on it. He's played it a lot. So now they either pick comfort and forfeit Xayah and Rakan immediately on the next draft phase, or at least the potential for KLG to take the Xayah and Rakan. Or they take Xayah, hope that they can get Rakan in some way or fashion. Admittedly, Rakan isn't too potent by himself. He's much better with Xayah, which isn't to say that he's bad by himself, it's just he's much better with Xayah. So, in an ideal world, if you take the Xayah, the odds of somebody else taking the Rakan away from you, unless they're exceptionally afraid of that pair, is going to be pretty low. So what ends up happening here is Fnatic, to no surprise, take Xayah. Although it's not something that Reckless has played an immense amount compared to other ADCs, they probably don't want to face the pair, so they decide, you know what, alright, we'll just take this off the table. So this in and of itself is fine. Teams trade Xayah and Tristana all the time, and as we're about to see, I'm going to move on a little bit. Oh, my mistake. It happens in the next portion of the pick phase, where KLG does take Tristana, though. But before we get to that, so KLG respond to the Xayah pick with Elise and Shen. For those of you who don't know Fnatic very well, Shen is actually something that Soaz has played a lot in the past in order to facilitate Reckless as a main carry. He also has, since he's played a wealth of games with it, immense experience in multiple lane matchups, which means he's able to, hold his own and be able to facilitate dives, usually with Broxah, who would play things like Elise. And speaking of Elise, KLG take that away from him too, and Tierwolf actually has played Elise at least 3 times. Gamepedia shows 3-0 on Elise in the summer split. So this is an excellent combination. Why? Because Elise and Shen together are capable of immense dive potential. Elise can go in, dive first, repel out, re-juggle aggro that way. Shen could obviously ult onto somebody, giving them a bit more of a shield, a little more survivability if they need to stay, take another tower shot, or if somebody's ever in danger, obviously that's the best use. So they can set up early plays here. So this is really good in conjunction with each other, but also they're 2 takeaway picks. And this is why I wanted to highlight this pick and ban phase, because not only is a good pick and ban phase a solid strategy as a team unit, but it's also the denial of your opponent in a sensible way. And this makes perfect sense, because now you'll be able to help fix, help your carry in Plugo if he takes that, set up early dives with these 2 champions, and we're going to see how the rest of the pick and ban phase do unfold. So now, that being said, let me just change my scene. Alright, so Fnatic answer with Xayah and Rakan. Now, why is this interesting here? Xayah is something that Broxah hasn't played too much, and it is capable of a lot of early gank setup in conjunction with Rakan, who obviously Xayah and Rakan have immense kill pressure in their lane. Rakan has a great distance that he can travel. And if you're ever in a position where Xayah does come into your lane, bottom specifically, you get a knock-up. Rakan can easily follow it up with a W before the person lands. Flash knockups are always a thing for Xayah, but there's immense gank pressure there. So this pick, I think, ultimately is to dissuade things like dives, because if Xayah happens to counter gank and be in that area, you can simply knock up a target. You can juggle them under a tower, and Rakan especially, Xayah after 6 with her ultimate, Rakan with his ultimate, things like that, it makes it much harder to do dives at least post 6 when everybody is 6, right? So let's see what else we have here. So KLG, they're going to round out this first portion of the pick phase with the Tristana, like I mentioned before. And teams have traded Tristana and Xayah. I do feel like Tristana is the better of the 280 carries, simply because she can take structures faster. She also has the reset on her jump, and if you time it correctly, obviously you can get out of things like the Rakan knockup. If you time it correctly, you can actually gain distance even though you become charmed by the Rakan ultimate. So these things are really potent. Even things like the Xayah snare, if you time it correctly. The jump is basically a get out of jail free card. Alternatively, it simply just gains you a little bit more distance if you can't outright escape something right away. So this is really good on top of the Shen that's there to protect. I think this is immense so far. And it's brilliant because, again, it's another pick that's something that Reckless is comfortable on. So every pick so far that KLG have taken are things that technically are denial picks, not so much the Tristana since they already decided on the Xayah in the first rotation, but these are all champions that Fnatic could play and have played and have done immensely well on, might I add. So moving on to the second ban phase and the first pick. So the second ban phase is actually really interesting because KLG decide to ban Aurelion Sol and LeBlanc on their side, right? So Aurelion Sol is a little bit of an ambiguous pick in the sense that not many people play him. So it's hard for teams to understand how to deal with him because they don't have much experience against the champion. So this denies a Caps, first of all, a champion that's kind of his own legacy pick in the sense that he played it in Challenger a lot. I think he's only played it once in professional play since he came to the LCS in EU. But LeBlanc is a champion he's performed on, had done immaculate things on. Even I think in Fnatic's second game last night, they actually utilized LeBlanc, if I remember correctly. But these are 2 champions that can roam, have a high potency for roaming. LeBlanc obviously can assassinate people later. And Aurelion Sol becomes relatively tanky in terms of HP. And then he also has a lot of CC later on. He has a lot of ways to facilitate his carries, his team. He can also roam over terrain, which is great and easy for him. And by removing these roaming champions, Caps notoriously is able to, whenever he has a lead or even when he's behind, a tendency to roam to other lanes when able. So these champions that make roaming easy, by denying that to Caps, even if he gets ahead or if he's behind, it kind of denies him an easier route to get back into the game or to spread a lead potentially, right? So with that out of the way, Fnatic respond on their side. They take out Taliyah and Orianna. Now, the Taliyah pick is great. It's in response to the Aurelion Sol ban. It's also something that Plugo plays. I think it's one of his top 3 most played champions, if I'm not mistaken. And he has a decent record in Summer. I believe it was 4-1 on the champion. So, you know, great denial pick. The wall obviously functions in a number of ways. You can zone the opponents, you can cut them off from a tower in order to secure the objective, which they already have a Tristana, so maybe that was actually a concern, since Tristana takes towers fast, since you can also zone out neutral objectives, such as Baron or Dragon, with the wall. You also can dominate choke points with Taliyah's E, her W, and her Q obviously helps if people are funneling into a small area. And taking that off the table is immense. It prevents Plugo from doing the same thing that they're trying to prevent Caps from doing, which is roaming. Early game roaming in any way, shape, or form, controlling certain areas of the map through that CC, through that ultimate. Taking away Orianna, though, I think is absolutely stellar here. KLG have the option to get the first pick after this ban phase. And if Orianna's on the table, it is Plugo's most played from Summer, I believe. I think he's 10-0 on the champion according to Gamepedia. 100% win ratio. That means KLG know how to play around this champion. They know how to utilize this champion. Plugo is a master of this champion. I think it's safe to say that, if nothing else. Denying them that pick, denying them added protection onto champions like the Tristana, absolutely marvelous. Especially since most of like the lane bully type situations are out of the way. You got rid of the LeBlanc, you got rid of the Syndra, right? So these are things that might give Orianna a tough time, and now they're off the table. So getting rid of the Orianna, who would have a relatively free lane at this point in time, you know, it's smart, it's very intelligent. So to move on to the next portion, which is this first pick from KLG. Now, they lock in Alistar for slow. Now, this is a pick that he's not really unfamiliar with. There's plenty of disrupt on his Q and W, as we already know. Alistar is a champion capable of that, which is kind of great if Rakan engages in conjunction with Alistar CC shedding ultimate, right? He's able to just get out of a charm if he needs to, then he can follow up with a quick Q to knock people up, and then a W to knock a threat backwards, or whatever the case may be, whatever the situation calls for. He has tools to mitigate the full engage, right? Not to mention the added tankiness from his ultimate allows him to survive while he's mitigating that engage, and that's the important part. So this here is a pretty genius pick. If Rakan and Xayah try to go in, Alistar could effectively peel one off, or just stay on top of the Tristana, make sure there's no follow-up engage, juggle up people who are trying to get onto the Tristana, and this is great. The only other thing that I could say could be an alternative pick here, although I think this draft is stellar, mind you, is potentially a Xayah, which comes with you know, its own drawbacks and helpfulness. Helpfulness in the fact that it can dissuade dive that's available already in the Rakan and the Rek'Sai. Also adds Ardent Sensor to Tristana and what would be a permanent shield in the late game off of her E. So, not to mention AoE Ardent off of the ult whenever the ult is used, although it's not primarily used for that purpose. Now, that's the drawback for this would be the fact that Alistar is probably going to be the main diving force, right? If Shen's going to ult onto someone, it's either Elise or Alistar, and in an ideal world, you want all of those parties there to execute a nice early game dive. You preferably want the Alistar level 6, right? And then maybe in a perfect world, he would have Mobies roam mid, and then they could set up the dive with the Elise, and then have the Shen ulti for a failsafe. Now, if you had Xayah, you couldn't do that. You could potentially shield the target that's diving, sure. Juggle up somebody under the tower with your own CC so they can't potentially like flash get out of the way, bait you to stay under the tower longer. It's very situational, but I do think that Alistar is much more potent here. I'm just posing the alternative option and stating the drawback and potential benefit there. So after seeing this Alistar, Fnatic decide, you know what, let's answer with a bit of a takeaway of our own, right? Because right now KLG doesn't have their mid laner visible. And the important part about that is Fnatic answers with Galio and Ryze. Now, why is this important? Galio is amongst one of the 4 top played champions of Plugo. And not to mention Monteraya has had a few games on it, not really many, so it's not something he would pick, and we already have the Shen anyway. But the fact that the mid laner is not here, Galio could be a comfort pick. They could utilize it if they put all their eggs in the Tristana basket if they wanted to go super heavy dive, because the Galio could follow in the Alistar, the Shen, the Elise, whatever he would need to do. So they take away this potential mid pick, and they have it top, which is excellent, because you already have the Rek'Sai who can dive in, and now you have the Rakan, who, first of all, the Rakan who could also dive in, but now you have the Galio who can facilitate that, the follow-up engage, so to speak, where if somebody goes deep enough, Galio automatically is creating this zone where everyone's going to get knocked up, and they either have to retreat or go all in, and odds are it's going to be in favor of Fnatic if they're choosing that engage. Unless, of course, some shenanigans go through with Tristana being protected a little too well with Shen and Alistar. But they take this pick away. It enables a lot more in terms of map pressure, added resistances to a carry. And they finalized their draft. They rounded out with this Rise. And why this Rise is so important is because if we look at all of the bans, we have Syndra who wave clears very efficiently. We have Taliyah who wave clears very efficiently. They both roam pretty decently. Taliyah obviously better than Syndra. LeBlanc roams pretty well. Aurelion Sol roams pretty well. And Orianna can control a lane. However, Rise with his safe wave clear and no other roaming champions on the board, at least outside of like maybe Corki we could say, Rise wins. He has safe wave clear relatively. He can E, Q, whatever he needs to do to clear the wave, stay away from confrontation if he wants. And now any mid laner who gets close enough to him can be rune prisoned, and if Rek'Sai is setting up a gank, it could be anything from flash on Burrow to rune prison, or rune prison to tunnel on Burrow. There's a lot of tools here. Even in the top lane, the Rek'Sai can provide damage, can initiate with the unburrow, Galio can then taunt, vice versa. The same thing has happened in reverse, right? Whoa, sorry about that. Point is, now all of these combinations work in conjunction, because the Galio complements Rakan and Rek'Sai. The Rise now offers this mobility across the map, just like Galio can provide mobility of his own, map pressure of his own. So now you have the Rise ulti, which is the last, I guess you would say, effective roaming instant teleportation for multiple members, not only something like Corki's package, which is just for the one person, and the relatively safe laning phase. He's going to scale up, he's going to be monstrous anyway. That's what Rise does. So these things together allow for easy repositioning across the map, getting from taking, say, a mid tower to a bot tower, or going from a mid tower to either neutral objective if Fnatic are on the offensive, and the opportunities here are endless. So that's really great. So now I'm hoping here, as I'm watching this draft, that KLG rounds out the entire draft with something a little more sensible, and we get Cassiopeia, which is the only gripe that I have. And like I said, there's a lot of merits that you could see here. The Miasma and the ulti could stop people from taking the Rise ultimate. Rakan would have to go in, and therefore Cassiopeia could ulti and freeze him in place. Same thing could be said for the Rek'Sai. Actually, I do wonder about that interaction, if Rek'Sai is technically underground and therefore can't see. But I'll check that out another point. A lot of these champions need to go in. Even Galio needs to go forward. And now we see a central theme on KLG's team, which is there are a lot of elements of disengage. Alistar can headbutt somebody away. Elise can cocoon somebody from a distance. Shen can obviously taunt ahead of the team to keep enemies in place. Cassiopeia can ult people. Tristana has her Buster Shot. Might have repeated one of those things, but, you know, point is, there's a lot of, like, disengage or ways to prevent an outright engage, and there are many champions who literally have abilities that make you run at the Cassiopeia, so in theory this is great, but I also have a little bit of a contention because of the fact that Cassiopeia's damage comes from the Twin Fangs primarily, and the repetition of that, which Galio can easily itemize for. He can easily stand in the front line and take less damage due to the Adaptive Helm. She is a champion, doesn't have too much protection outside of the Shen, because in and of herself, she's not very mobile outside of her flash. So if Rek'Sai was to unburrow, if Rakan was to get into the pocket, if Galio was to follow up, then there's a large potential for Cassiopeia to die here. So I would say that maybe potentially a Corki would be decent here. And Plugo admittedly doesn't have many Corki games. I think he had like one logged for summer. And so there might be a little inexperience there. Maybe they didn't feel comfortable with that, or maybe they just valued the ability for Cassiopeia to stop things like people going through the Rise ultimate or stop engages with her ultimate, since somebody would be charging at her and facing her. Maybe they valued that a little more, but Corki's damage is primarily channeled as AP anyway, right? I think it's 80% of his damage is processed as AP damage. So this wouldn't skew the current damage ratio of AP-AD, and also, it would be really effective considering it's 2 carry threats that you can shield with the Shen ultimate, and also facilitate a lot of damage. Also, Corki in lane can escape Rise a lot more reliably, can escape the Rek'Sai a lot more reliably with his Valkyrie, his W, right? So, I do think that could have been a reasonable choice. Again, that depends on comfort and the ability to perform or execute that champion. Also, it depends on how they view the trade-offs between Corki and Cassiopeia. So that's primarily it. I'm going to take a quick look at my notes and see what else we have here. Oh yes, so Cassiopeia, to contextualize a little bit for KLG, Plugo's top 4 most played champions in order, according to Gamepedia, of course, Orianna, Taliyah, Syndra, and Galio. Cassiopeia is like right under that, so Corki I think is at the bottom of the barrel in terms of what he has the most games on. So Cassiopeia might be an element of comfort as well, which I almost neglected to mention. So at the end of the day, that was basically all my thoughts on individual picks and possible alternatives. And again, I've mentioned strengths and weaknesses of both comps, right? We have heavy engage potential, heavy early game potential coming out of KLG, right? We have a lot of potential dive as well coming out of Fnatic, but there's a lot more, I would say, much stronger ability to rotate out of Fnatic. When you factor in Galio ultimate, the Rise ultimate, which carries multiple people, Shen is the only one with global presence, really, on KLG. So in an ideal world, if I didn't watch the game, I would say that Fnatic would probably be able to win through faster rotations or better macro. Just because they have the tools to get around the map a lot more efficiently. They have tools to dissuade dives as well. If someone was dove for whatever reason, say Alistar, Elise, Shen, say they all wanted to dive somebody. Rakan can easily dissuade that. Xayah can knock somebody up to make juggling aggro a little more difficult. Galio can obviously ult the primary target to give them resistances to help them survive. Rise can rune prison someone. Xayah can ult and become untargetable. So there's like this game of chess where this entire pick and ban is KLG taking picks away as well as facilitating their carries. Fnatic also taking these picks that kind of avoid the main niche of KLG's comp, which is this early dive, and then later on they have the hyper carry damage situation in Tristana and Cassio, when there's a lot of ways to disrupt that in Fnatic's composition, let alone a lot of ways to stop dive. So this is really the game of cat and mouse, and what it really comes down to is the fact that Fnatic's team composition just seems to be better at the rotation element. So the game unfolds how it unfolds. Not here to talk about that, but that brings this pick and ban analysis to an end, and this is what I would call a top tier pick ban. It all comes down to execution here as to who wins, because both teams seem to have gotten what they want and have excellent tools at their disposal, especially considering everything that was banned and the layers of intellect that go into this pick ban phase. And I will keep harping on it, is the fact that some of these picks are takeaway picks and trying to not only ban certain champions, but literally since you're taking away, it's like you got more bans than 5 bans, and it's great. I think it's top tier.